They had found out that this man had started following Jesus, and so apprehended him on the side of the road and had knives and stabbed him. And someone found him, rushed him to the hospital. Nora went and was able to interact with him a little bit. And she said, when she told me, that she was crying and saying, "This is my fault. I shouldn't have even said anything to you." And he said to her, "Nor, this is not your fault. I'm so glad that I learned about Jesus and that I could follow him. This is not your fault." And then later on that night, he passed away in the hospital. And it was a really dark time.
Hi guys, welcome back to Raw Mission. I'm Matt, your host for this podcast. And today I'm joined by Emily, who's currently serving in Lebanon and has a particular heart for and ministry amongst Syrian refugee widows. You're going to hear some wonderful stories about the emerging fellowship of believers there. And Emily will also talk with great honesty about trauma, poverty, mental health, burnout, and the dark night of the soul. Well, this morning I've got Emily with me. Hi Emily, good to see you.
Hi, good to see you too.
Whereabouts are you right now, and where are you from originally?
I am currently in Lebanon, and I am from the States.
Yeah, brilliant. Let's hear a little bit about your background, your upbringing. Did you grow up in a kind of Christian home, Christian family, and always dream about going overseas, or has this been something later on in your life that God brought to you?
Yeah, I did grow up in a Christian home, and definitely started really following Jesus in high school. But I think what really just caught my heart was when I took Perspectives on the World Christian Movement as a freshman in college. And I just knew, like, it just really gave me God's heart for the nations and expanded my vision of his heart to see his kingdom expanded here on earth. So that really moved in me to want to go out.
Just in case someone doesn't know what Perspectives is, can you quickly summarize it?
Sure. It's a class that kind of goes over different missions movements over the course of history, and also just how God's heart isn't just for a person, a family, it's for the nations. And so there's a quick summary for you.
Okay, and so that started growing in you, did you say at the end of high school or in your college years?
End of high school and my freshman year of college, yes.
And so what happened next?
Well, my junior year of college, a couple of us, we were all friends, decided we wanted to go overseas and do a short-term mission trip together. We just said, "God, we're willing, like, just open doors." And doors opened for us to go to Lebanon. And so we went on a short-term trip. 6 weeks in, that would have been summer of 2004.
Okay, wow, yeah. So a group of you went out there. How did you manage that? Did you just work it out on your own, look up something online and find a church to go visit, or was there sort of an organization involved?
Well, we had some relational connections with Carl Medeiros, who was in Lebanon at the time. He's been in the States now for a while. But so we were going to partner with him, but then he ended up getting kicked out of the country. So we overlapped with him for a day. We got to worship and pray together. But then we found ourselves in a foreign country on our own. One person spoke Arabic, but in Lebanon, you can get around with English. And so we ended up partnering with the IMB, doing the Bible distribution project, which ended up being great for us and a great way for us to meet people and really start to understand and really get a love for the culture here.
And so what kind of area was that? Because Lebanon is so mixed, isn't it? We did a podcast a few weeks ago now, when we were hearing all about how, a lot of Christians there and Druze and different kinds of Muslims and different cultural backgrounds. So on that short-term trip, were you working amongst Muslims?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So how did that go? Was it a real eye-opener? Was it easier than you thought or tougher than you thought?
It was I'm going to go with the first, a real eye opener. I think I was unprepared for how hospitable, how welcoming people would be, invite us into their homes, offer us tea, offer us coffee. It was make us meals. I was really just taken with the hospitality that they showed us.
It's famous, isn't it? The hospitality in the Arab world. And that's great to hear. Yeah, that confirmed just again. And at this point, was it a group of singles that went out? And how did that work as a single woman? Because some countries it's quite scary to travel to as a single woman, perhaps. But did you feel very at ease in Lebanon?
Mostly, I was single then. And yes, I definitely had a few challenging interactions, but I think that it was us, a bunch of college students. With the guys on the trip, I feel like we never went out just alone. We always had someone with us. So
yes, yeah, that's good advice, isn't it, for anyone even traveling, probably, especially in a new culture where you don't really understand what's happening.
Exactly.
Okay, yeah. So what happened after that? That was for, did you say 6 weeks?
Yes, that was 6 weeks.
And so how did that develop in your own calling and vocation?
Well, while I was there, I had a dream, and the Lord, around my freshman year of college, the Lord had started to speak to me in dreams. And so I was definitely in a season of paying attention to my dreams. And in this dream, I was erecting a tent, and we had the tent pegs and the tent, and I was showing other Muslim women how to erect this tent. But we didn't have hammers. We had the Injil Sharif. We had Arabic New Testaments. And I woke up and was really just shaken to my core, just by the dream and all that was in it and all that was implicated in it. And I just knew in the depths of my spirit that God wanted me in this nation to just really help these women, help partner with them, show them how they too can house the presence of God in their communities.
Wow, that's really powerful, isn't it? Just want to take a minute just to think about that, because there's all sorts we could talk about there, just dreams and how God does still speak in dreams, not just to Muslims that we work amongst, but even to us, and we do need to be open to that. But how exciting. I mean, just thinking as well about the tabernacle and the presence of God and just the imagery around that dream. So interesting.
Yes, it was so rich. I mean, it's just a dream that I've taken with me as a traveling companion, and has helped me through harder seasons, easier seasons, just a dream that's with me always.
And even being Christmas now, where, we read about some of the dreams in the Christmas story in the scriptures. And I often think, with Mary, she had these promises, she had these sort of dreams and these, this child will be called this and this child will do this, but she had to hold on to so much, didn't she? She had to treasure it in her heart. So was there something about that vision that you got that took years to unfold?
Yes, it was definitely a long process. Because let's see, I had that dream in 2004, and then we went back on subsequent short-term trips in 2005, 2006. In 2006, we had to evacuate because of the July 2006 war. And we ended up in Jordan, but actually felt like a mercy, a gift from God, however you could say it, because we found really great Arabic programs there. And so we knew, okay, we want to move here first, because in Lebanon, there is so much English spoken. It can be hard to learn Arabic. And so it helped us realize, okay, because at this point, I had married one of the guys on the short-term trip. So we knew cool. We knew we wanted to move overseas long-term, but we didn't know how it was going to happen. And so it was interesting, because then in 2006, we knew, okay, let's spend 2 years in Jordan, really learning Arabic, and then move to Lebanon. So, But in regards to the dream, yes, it was a sort of unfolding gift, where obviously the dream at first was amazing, and I knew it was God calling me to the Middle East. But then it kind of helped me as I'm plowing through Arabic because it's such a hard language. And then, we moved to Lebanon. I have young kids. It can be so hard to meet people, and you meet a person, you think, oh, maybe this is a person we can like erect a tent together, house the presence of God, right? And then they end up, fickling out. And so it really was, I would say, 10 years before I really felt like I had a woman that we were partnering together. We were, erecting a tent to house the presence of the Lord. And so it was a decade-long unfolding of that dream, for sure.
Wow. Let's pick that up, because I want to hear that story, but let's just fill in the pieces of the puzzle. What was the process between those short-term trips, then the language learning? Did you go back to the States after being in Jordan, or did you go long-term into Lebanon at that point? And what sort of platform did you have there to serve the people when you first arrived?
Yeah, those are great questions. I have 2 kids. I had my first in Jordan, and so he was a baby at the time. We went back after our 2 years Arabic program in Jordan to the States for about 3 months, and then relaunched into Lebanon. We've always really had a heart for students, so we started there. And my husband at the time taught at a high school. He's now teaching at a university, but we've continued that sort of ministry all through these different years. And so it was great because my husband's really a natural evangelist. And so he would meet all these people and make connections, and then I could follow up with them,
Nice.
so, and we really love the disciple making movements process, where you try to find a person of peace, start reading the Bible with them, starting with creation, trying to help them understand who God is, how they can have a relationship with him, and then moving into the prophecies of Jesus and then into his life. We found that to be a really just powerful way to engage our cousin friends. And so we've been doing that since the beginning. And we're doing that. And then the Syrian war happened. And that's when refugees started pouring in. And I felt very moved to help them. We don't necessarily feel very tied to one place. So right now we're in a neighborhood that's very close to the university, and we have a house church with MBBs that are mostly university age, but spanning up to late 20s.
Wow. So do you have your own house church fellowship with other international folks, and then this house church with young student-y types and people in their 20s from a Muslim background?
No, we don't have a church with other internationals. This is our family, our fellowship. This church.
Wow, that's wonderful. And are you guys the only foreigners in that, or do you have some other families involved?
We are the only foreigners in it.
Okay, yeah, a real privilege. And so does that all happen in English or Arabic?
It's mostly in English. It is some in Arabic, especially if someone comes that doesn't. Most of them are fluent in English, so we kind of do a mix.
Yes.
But for the sake of our kids, it's sweet. Some of the people there will switch, especially for my youngest, who's still getting proficient in Arabic. They'll switch in English for her, which is really kind. So, but most of it's in English.
So, yeah, that's really exciting to hear about some of these young guys then who have chosen to follow Jesus from a Muslim background. Has that been difficult for them? Is this an underground thing? Do their families know? Or what's the situation? What's the environment like there for Muslims exploring Jesus?
That's a great question. I think for the most part, this is just our experience. So we've heard of many different experiences. We do encourage them to tell their families, and they do. And they're usually just met with maybe some social ostracization, but not anything that is dangerous. It's just, I think it's puzzling to the parents or to the families, but they accept it generally.
Wow, so that's really cool. Because certainly, obviously in Pakistan where I was, I think everyone would be very, very worried that it would immediately lead to complete family cutoff at best, and possibly violence, possibly death. So that's really encouraging to hear that where you are, possibly because it's a lot of education there, a lot of mixing of cultures and religions, and so perhaps there is a bit more openness and freedom for people to pick their own path.
Yes, I think that's very true.
Mm.
In fact, we just had one of the women who's been coming. She chose to get baptized recently. And so she actually invited her brother. And he came and observed. And actually, when we actually had people share just about this woman and what we saw in her and what we saw God doing in her life. And he shared about her, and just in this honoring, beautiful way, even though he had never been a part. So it is nice because there is a more of an openness here than I know I've heard in other more closed countries, or even when we were living in Jordan. So
yes. Yeah. Wow, that's really cool. So this group then, this church that you're part of, it's ladies, men, but mostly younger, in their 20s. So.
Yes, correct.
Yeah, great. Wow. Yeah, well, tell us a little bit then about the influx of Syrian refugees and how that's impacted you guys, your lives, your ministry.
Sure. So when the Syrian war started, it just felt like it was on my doorstep, this humanitarian crisis on my doorstep. And I felt like I had to do something. However, I had just had a baby. And so I felt the Lord, say, pray. There will come a time where you will serve, but right now I'm asking you to pray, and so that definitely tried me, because I want to get out there, be in the thick of it. So I would say for the first 6 months or so, I did lots of praying for these people and heard stories from my friends who had tried to help them, because most of the Syrians in Lebanon, I mean, they're all over the country. There's millions here. I taught English in a school that we had partnered with a Lebanese organization that they try to set up a school in the camps. I helped as a translator in different mobile medical clinics. And it was actually through these clinics, two of my teammates actually at the time were running these clinics, and I would translate, but then also we would offer to pray for every person that came in, and almost all of them said yes to prayer. And so I had these beautiful times of prayer for these people who were so traumatized and wanted desperately for someone to listen to them. And so it was a time of listening and praying for these people. And so it was through the clinics that I met, in particular, this one woman, Noor, and she was so struck by how we treated them, because she was used to people just coming in and just, giving them their food parcels and then, okay, next, kind of just treated as a number. And she said, you really asked. I could, because we did in bigger clinics, we would have like a tent where they would see the men, a tent where they would see the women. Sometimes we'd bring in doctors, that would come and visit and help. And then a tent where we would have kind of the pharmacy with the meds. And then that's where we'd offer to pray for people. And so this woman had agreed to house the pharmacy in her tent. And she just saw us praying for people for hours. And she was so astonished at how we interacted with them, at how we listened and prayed. And she said, I just want to know more. She was so curious. She just wanted to know more about it. So I went and followed up and visited with her. And she very quickly became a person of peace that I was looking for. And every story we listened to from the Bible, she wanted more, and she wanted to share about. And there was actually an entire camp of widows across the street from us that she would every story she would share. And so we started so it was started with her, and then it became 2 other women, and then it became 6 other women, and so it just started growing. And and it was a really exciting time, because I could just see, it was like I got a front row seat seeing God speak life and hope into these women through the scriptures.
Can you give us an indication of what they had come out of back in Syria? Because I mean, some of us read a lot of the news stories and dig into that, but for others, it's just either it passes them by, or deliberately, I suppose folks here sometimes choose, I can't handle that. I can't read too many crazy stories from around the world of people suffering. So can you just give us an indication of some of the things they've come out of that they're struggling with?
Yes. A lot of the widows lost their husbands in the war.
Mm.
And so very traumatic stories there where they either see their husband die in front of them. They see people, most of them are from an area that was ISIS controlled. And so, ISIS was just brutal. They would make you watch public beheadings. I mean, it was brutal. And so that too, the stories, I had secondary trauma from the stories. Yeah. So the stories were truly awful. And so I think that to see these women so downtrodden, so hopeless, to see them grasp on to the stories that we're hearing about God, and it's like they were being offered a different way, a door of light, a door of hope that they could open and walk through. So
I mean, I presume some of them lost not just husbands but children.
Yes.
Did any older folks come through who lost several members of their family, I suppose, older, younger?
Yes. Yeah. Several members of family. Yes. As you're saying it, I'm recalling stories, very specific stories coming to mind. That it's heartbreaking. The stories are heartbreaking.
Yeah, we can't imagine, really. I mean, just not wanting to dwell on it too long, but did you find that they really wanted to talk about these things and share these stories? Because presumably they'd shared them in their own communities, but was there something different about an outsider listening?
Yes, I think so. One thing that I observed is when they would get in groups to share, all of them had traumatizing stories. And so it would almost be this, a woman maybe vulnerably shares something that was really hard. She lost her son. But then another woman would say, well, that's hard, but I lost 2 sons. And so it didn't necessarily feel like a safe space where they could truly unburden themselves from the pain and suffering that they were living through every day. And I think that through listening to these stories and through just the discipleship process that happens, they realized there could be a different way of holding each other's pain. And that was actually a beautiful transformative process that happened.
Do you have particular go-to Bible stories that you found have really touched hearts in the middle of this process with the widows?
That's a wonderful question.
Sorry to put you on the spot on that one.
No. I'm just thinking of the ones that are referenced the most by the women I interact with the most. I think one would be the woman coming to Jesus's feet and anointing his feet with the perfume that's so expensive and wiping his feet with her hair. And just this, and how she's accepted in this company of men, I think is a story that sticks with them that they reference. Another one they reference a lot is the parable of building a house on rock instead of sand. And again, I think it's that they felt so out of control. They lost their homes. They lost family members. There's this sense of this sinking sand. There's no solid place to put their feet. And Jesus became a rock for them. And so that is one that they reference and that they tell and retell a lot. They also love all the miracles. And because then they have their own stories of miracles, how God has miraculously provided for them. And so those are just like food for prayer. And yes, I've seen how God's provided for me,
Yes.
So.
Yes, gosh, yeah, that reminds me of Elisha and the widow, and yeah, just the miracle stories in the Old Testament as well. But yeah, that's so interesting. That sinking sand, I would never have thought of that as being one that would really hit home, but that makes a lot of sense. And this is going to sound a little trite in comparison to the ladies you're engaging with, but as workers ourselves who leave some things behind of our own culture, there's just a little bit in our story where we've had that feeling of everything we touch or try to stand on is shifting. We can't control this. We don't get this environment. We don't get this culture, or suddenly our visas are taken away, or suddenly we don't know how healthcare works here for our kid who's sick. And it's a tiny microcosm of what these ladies have experienced. But I'm trying to just, connect for our listeners how you, as an American woman coming to talk with them, listen to them, can actually also engage on a little level there as obviously a woman, a mother, a follower of Jesus, but also just something about my life is kind of in God's hands and I don't really control all of it. You get a little bit more of that than those of us when we're sort of in the West and everything seems, we think we're more stable here.
That's very true. And I had a moment, this was a few years ago, when the main leader that I invested in, Noor, she just looked at me and she said, "You left everything. You left your family, you left your home, not because war forced you out like me. You chose to because you wanted to come here and share about Jesus with us. I just can't, what sacrifice?" And I just started crying. I don't think I ever expected that someone else would see that sort of sacrifice that I felt pretty hidden. It feels very real to all of us, the workers all living overseas, of the sacrifices, the daily sacrifices, and all the myriad ways we have to choose, to live this life. But for someone else to reflect it back to me like that, I just felt really seen by her. So
this is powerful. This is beautiful. I can see it right there. The two of you talking, seeing each other in the suffering, in the sacrifice, whether enforced or chosen. That's really beautiful. And then, of course, the whole heart of this is not just, your connection, but connecting that to Jesus and how he gave up so much, and what we do, again, is just a teeny little picture of the amazing incarnation. And wow, leading up to Christmas right now, this is beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. So tell us more about Noor's, I suppose, her connections and what God is doing amongst the widows and the camps. Yeah, any other stories you'd like to share?
Sure. So with Noor, she just, as a true person of peace, couldn't help but share, invite people into her home. This is who God is. This is who Jesus is. I never knew. You've got to hear this. Even took a trip back to Syria at one point and started groups there. Because again, she just couldn't help but share. And so through all of that, a lot of these women that are in this network are widows, and all of them are suffering economically in terrible, terrible ways. But the widows, because they have no husbands to help them. If they do have family, maybe they're in Turkey, maybe they're in Syria, there's no real financial help for them. Nor would say, how can we help these women? We can't just share these words, but then they might not even know where their next meal is coming from. A lot of them at this point would be working out in the fields harvesting potatoes, which is backbreaking work, for a salary they wouldn't see. It would go straight to the landowner. And it's basically a form of modern slavery. It's terrible. They never got to see their kids because they're out in the fields all day.
Sharing this podcast is a really good way to encourage more people to get involved with God's great mission, whether locally or globally. So please do help us get the word out there. If you use an iPhone, it's pretty easy to write us a review, and that has a big impact on how many people can find us. Alternatively, you could share one of your favourite episodes with your church family or home group or CU, either in person or on WhatsApp or social media. Thanks, guys, and now let's get back to the podcast.
So Noor and I, we really prayed and wondered and asked, okay, God, how can we help this? And I didn't want to muddy the waters with money or trying to help them financially. How do we do this well? And I actually had a dream where God very clearly told me to help the widows, which was the impetus I needed. And from there, it was beautiful because Noor and I were able to dream up together, how can we help these women in a sustainable way? And she's a seamstress by trade. She actually had a thriving sewing business before the war, had 12 or 13 girls working for her. And so she said, I could teach these women how to sew, and then they could be making their own money and we could get them out of the fields. And so I raised enough money for one sewing machine. We started training groups of women out of her house. This was years ago, seven or 8 years ago. And praying, hoping it would work. And it did. We started training them in groups. They learned how to sew. They started making the abayas, the long dresses they wear. And there was a market for it. Lebanese will buy them. Syrians will buy them. And so from there, we just started training more and more women to now I think we've trained around 80 women.
Wow.
And some of them we've been able to resettle back into Syria in their towns. So it's been a really beautiful process and an amazing way, just that I wouldn't have even fathomed, but an amazing way for the gospel to go forth. And Nora is just a natural evangelist. So any customer that comes in, and then she's just reproducing herself and all the other women that she's discipling. So any customer who comes into one of my address, any group of women that she trains, they start each day with prayer and they start each day with a lesson. And so it's been a beautiful way to see this community grow.
That's so wonderful. It's combining that sense of NGO work, but done in the right way, where it's actually business development. It's releasing skills that are already there, and the gospel at the same time. So there's that sort of business and entrepreneurial spirit as mission going on as well. So I love how all this is coming together: gospel, business, development work, I suppose.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Special.
Yes, it feels so holistic. And just, I've really felt in it because I don't have a business background at all.
Right.
And so I really felt just God going before me and preparing the way in every step. And it's just been beautiful even just to see how empowered these women feel. Spiritually, financially, like it's just a full holistic transformation. I remember a few years ago, I went up for my weekly meeting with Noor, and she said, "Oh, I have great news to tell you." She said, "So, Fatima, she really wanted to go to the north. She has some relatives there. They want to harvest olives together, but she really wanted to go and share about Jesus and what's going on, but she didn't have the money. So all the widows, we all pooled our money together. We put together, all of us together, we raised $50 so that we could send Fatima to the north. It's in the Tripoli area, so that she could go and start sharing Jesus." And I was just astounded. I couldn't believe it. They're just sending out their first worker, out to the north. And I had no part in it. And I was so happy that I just heard about it after the fact,
Yeah. Gosh, that's amazing, isn't it? And I'm just wondering how that works for you as a wife and a mother. Has it been to juggle all these things? You've got, so many things that you probably dream about for your family, and then your ministry and your business and your husband's work. And how does that all work together? Has it been easy to find that balance?
I think that I've realized there's never going to be a balance where I think I'm going to give this percentage of my week to prayer and this percentage of my week to Syrian refugees and this percentage of my week to university students. It's more of the seasons. And I think it's definitely because it is a lot. It's true. It's a lot. But I think that it's helped me to trust God even more, to say, God, I am a finite being. I only have this much time in the week. And I'm also an introvert. So I actually can't just be out talking all day. I have to make sure that I have space to myself. And I really do feel really recharged if I get lots of just space, just by myself with the Lord, praying, worshiping. I'm a musician, so I love music. And so I have to make sure I have that space too. And so just holding it very open-handedly. And even honestly, with the nature of refugee work, some weeks it is crazy and I'm spending way more time there. More than the next week, there's a couple of university students that have their own crises so I really just have to say, okay, Lord, here I am. You know my capacity better than I do. So please help me, so.
That's good. Yeah, here I am today, Lord. What do you have for me today? Or what do you have for me this week? And trying to be flexible enough. I'm really glad you said you're an introvert, because so many of our listeners will think, if you're going to go overseas and do missions, 1, you have to be an extrovert. 2, you have to be an evangelist. Actually, no, there are loads of introverts out there doing various different things. We're all different, aren't we? And God will use us in different ways. But no, that's really good. But let alone, the other thing I was going to say is spiritually, we need those times, even if we're super extroverted. We need those times to pull away, like Jesus pulled away from the crowds. Otherwise, the demands will completely overwhelm us. And I mean, how many stories are there of folks like us who end up in burnout because we don't set good, healthy practices around our own spiritual lives or emotional lives or family lives? So yeah, thank you for encouraging us in that way. Could you share a little bit more just about the challenges that you personally have faced? But you mentioned secondary trauma earlier. Anything you want to share about that?
Sure. I think that with my own, and this goes back to capacity, what we were just talking about, with my own mental wellness and making sure that I am thriving and integrated as a person. Yeah, a few years ago was suffering, would wake up at night just with stories I heard or women that had come into the clinic who were obviously traumatized, but obviously neglecting their children because of how traumatized they were. It was really hard. And I'm really thankful as a visiting psychologist actually that was doing a training for people working with refugees kind of sat me down and said, hey, you're telling me these things, I'm seeing these things, I would recommend, getting some help. And I'm so glad he did, because I just didn't know. I didn't know about secondary trauma. I didn't know why, I was feeling the way I was feeling, why I was waking up at night. And so I'm so grateful for that, because it did help me. I actually went to Spain for a week, got some care, started some counseling. And really from there, it's just an invitation to deeper integration of even stuff from my past that was coming up that I felt God inviting me to deal with, so that I could become a healthier individual that would be able to engage the people that God is calling me to engage. So
thank you. Yeah, that's really helpful. I think there's such an awareness growing, isn't there, in the younger generation of mental well-being and the good things we need to pay attention to, in terms of getting help when we need help. And it touches on pride in a sense, doesn't it? Maybe we who are a bit older than you or the younger generation, even of students coming through, we certainly had a pride, I think, growing up, that I can cope, I can handle this. Maybe guys fall into this more than ladies. Can I say that without being sexist? But I think as a guy, perhaps I can say that we're not quite as good at I think, being willing to go there, to get some counseling, to get some help. But especially if you're interacting with people who have incredibly difficult stories, you need someone to go and talk about that with yourself, because no one's shoulders are strong enough to carry all these things. That's probably the bottom line, isn't it? And even if we know the Lord and we unburden to him, it's still good to get professional community, godly help when we can get it.
Yes, I wholeheartedly agree. And yes, there's definitely some pride there for me too, of I can do this. I might be waking up at night, but whatever, like just not wanting to deal with it. And it was such a mercy for the psychologist to say, hey, why don't you stop? I needed someone to tell me, like, hey, just stop and let's take stock of how you are feeling, so.
Yes, it's okay to care for your own soul.
Yes.
So important. And to give someone to give you permission to do that is very valuable, isn't it? And we haven't talked much at all about your husband, but I'm sure he's the kind of guy that's very supportive of your role, your ministry, your traveling out and so on. So, I know that this is a whole family thing and your kids. So, everyone's got to look after themselves and each other, don't they, in the midst of this kind of work.
Yes.
A little shout out just to the listeners. There's a really good podcast I've enjoyed called Restoring the Soul. I might put that in the episode notes, because that touches on a lot of these issues. And I think it's important. Yeah. So what about team life out there? You've had quite others around you supporting you. Has that been a good experience?
Yes, I had a wonderful team experience. We were sent out from our local church together. And so we had already been doing life together as a community, in America, and then had the privilege of being able to do it overseas. And so learned Arabic together, moved to Lebanon together, and we were all around the same age. And so we raised our kids together. And did mission together. I mean, it was a privilege. That's that long season. That was about, spanning about a decade.
That's
It's
brilliant.
a real.
Yeah, that's something that perhaps folks won't have thought about, that it's, sometimes we think in a very Western individualistic way. I feel called to the nations, I'm going to go and do this. But it's amazing if it's a group thing. Our church could, put the call out there, and we could find a team that would come together from our church to go and do this together. So I love that. Yeah, I'd love to see more of that in the UK. Yeah, and what about any team challenges? It's not always rosy.
No, it's definitely not always rosy. And I think that probably the biggest challenge was Lebanon. Lebanon, I was saying this to a friend the other day. It's a bit like a siren song. From far away, sounds really beautiful and you're drawn to it. But as you get closer and the day-to-day life, I think especially with families with kids, it can be really grating. And there's just a high level of adaptability you have to embrace to be able to live here, especially right now after all that's happened in the country. And it's a hard place to live. And so I think that that part was hard, of saying goodbye to teammates, then new teammates would come, then we'd say goodbye to them. So the revolving door is hard emotionally.
Yes. Yeah, that is tricky when teammates come, teammates go, because you've already done all the goodbyes to your own family, and then to have to keep saying new goodbyes to people that you've done life with and become family with. I can imagine that's tough. I had a little bit of that. And I mean, you mentioned in passing life in Lebanon can be tough with what's going on, but just for those who know nothing about Lebanon, really, in the Middle East, politics or troubles you've had, what kinds of things have been really difficult for the nation and for you guys?
So in 2019, there was a revolution where the Lebanese people were just tired of the corrupt government, which is basically still run by the warlords that were in charge during the Civil War. And people were just tired of the nation suffering and the government doing nothing about it. So, I mean, millions of people turned out for these protests. It was mostly peaceful, but there were some deaths. And I think that time was really stressful because they would shut a lot of the roads. And so you couldn't go anywhere. So even before the pandemic, our kids didn't go to school for maybe 2 months because they could never get to school because they had shut so many roads. And so that was hard, and nothing changed, unfortunately. And so the government, the country of Lebanon has just slid further down to where a failed state now. And even basics like electricity, water, they're just hard to get for a lot of people. And so that's been really, really hard. And then you throw in, the pandemic, which was hard for everyone around the world and hard for this country. And then in August of 2020, there was a huge blast in the port. Yes. They were storing hundreds of kilos of ammonium nitrate unsafely, and it looked like the whole city had gone through the Civil War in the span of a few minutes because of the impact of the blast. It was very, very traumatizing for anyone that was in the city. People thought Israel was coming to bomb. Yeah. Everyone was bracing themselves for more. What's going to happen next? It was very hard, and so just the morale of Lebanese here right now is very low. Feel very hopeless, and I think very unsafe because just anything can happen. People get so angry so fast, and so it's a challenging time to live here.
That's interesting because we talked just a little bit about personal trauma and secondary trauma. But actually, I guess there probably is something, I haven't even thought about it much, but there's probably, I'm sure, studies about community trauma and just, like you say, being on edge. It's that sense of, if people are on edge and just blowing up quite often, or the opposite, which is the sort of hypoarousal, they call it, don't they, in psychology, where you just shut down and you can't even care about anything anymore. And I guess that can happen on a community level, not just on a personal level. So, whole countries do go through periods of this, don't they? And So how are you seeing your family or your ministry responding to this situation? Or what are your dreams and hopes or your prayers at this time for the country?
I have lots of hopes and dreams for this country. I have such a deep love and a deep hope for kingdom transformation here. And I definitely have to ask God to give me eyes to see, because even when you look around, I mean, we're 2.5 years later, there's still blown out buildings. The port still looks like a giant just went and had fun with a hammer. I mean, there's still a huge ship on its side in the port. There's just not the money to rebuild. And so when you look at it with earthly eyes, you think, how God, how can this nation rebuild its heart, its soul? But I have to believe that he does have a plan. And I do see it, the people that come to our house church and say, this is such a safe place, and it's like, bring people to this safe place. And so people finding those safe places, people finding communion with other people and finding healing through Jesus. Because like you said, yes, the community trauma, and I would say even generational trauma, because I think even as I've talked to people Lebanese who are older than me that lived through the war, they said it's been so triggering, yes. all the protests and then the blast. It just takes they're suddenly 10 again, back in the war. And yep. I had one friend who told me, I stopped in the middle of the street. I heard because there was a skirmish, this was a year ago, but there were RPGs being fired. And she said, I stopped in the middle of the street. And suddenly I was back as a 16-year-old and hearing bombs go overhead and wondering if I was going to die. And I had shopkeepers from across the street yelling at me, Madame, get over here, And it is just, it's so much compounded trauma for them. But again, it's that thing of I have to ask God to give me eyes to see how he sees these people, he sees this nation.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think sometimes when communities, whether in the West or the East or anywhere really, when we find ourselves in the pigsty, like the prodigal son, there's an opportunity there somewhere, isn't there, to say, God, have mercy on this nation. And I pray that for our nation here, as well as for many, nations around the world. But that we can only pray, can't we? Lord, have mercy in this situation. May the people realize there is only one rock that we can cling to. And everything else is shifting sand, whether it's wealth or health or stability, security. So, I suppose it just goes back to that, doesn't it? The parable we talked about earlier. Lord, show us the rock, show the people that there's one hope. And that everything here is temporary. That's the hope that we bring, isn't it? The hope of eternal life. And that safe space, that's powerful. I like that. We're people who bring not just good news, but we bring a presence with us and a safe space with us, the presence of God, that image of the tent again that you had, building the tabernacle, the presence of God. Because if they find safety, it's not just your house and nice people in this house, it's the presence of God. And they can tap into that this is where I feel loved and safe. The presence of God goes with them everywhere. That's the joy of it, isn't it? We don't have a physical temple we have to go to. He is with us. He is in us. And that peace, that security in the midst of bombs flying or economic collapse or pandemic, that's the hope that we carry, isn't it, to the nations?
Yes.
I love this. This has been really interesting. There's one story you mentioned to me earlier about, because you talked a lot about ministering to the ladies, of course, that's a lot of your world. Tell us about the prayers you had for some guys coming to faith from a Muslim background.
Yes, we've been praying for years, mobilized prayer for years, that men would come into this network and start following Jesus. And a few years ago, we finally had our first guy. He was in a group, was falling in love with Jesus, but was getting some pushback from some of the people around him, but continued to want to meet together, do lessons with Noor.
So we're talking Syrian refugees now.
Yes, Syrian refugees. And one day he was walking to the UN agency that gives out food parcels, and a group of men from a clan there that really give people who decide to follow Jesus, they do not like and will give people grief if they find out. And so they had found out that this man had started following Jesus, and so apprehended him on the side of the road and had knives and stabbed him. And someone found him, rushed him to the hospital. Nor went and was able to interact with him a little bit. And she said, when she told me, that she was crying and saying, "This is my fault. I shouldn't have even said anything to you." And he said to her, "Nor, this is not your fault. I'm so glad that I learned about Jesus and that I could follow him. This is not your fault." And then later on that night, he passed away in the hospital. And it was a really dark time. It was a really dark time, a real soul searching time for Nor, for me, for a couple of us. But it was definitely a dark night of the soul for her. But as she wrestled through it, came to the conclusion of God has called me to this. And she found it to be such a mercy that she was able to talk to him, and he was able to say the words to her, "It is not your fault."
That's huge.
And she said, "I have to believe him when he says that." And so it was a really hard season, but we continued to pray that men would rise up and join the women in this network.
Amen. Okay, thank you for sharing that. That's definitely something we can pray into. So it's good to know about that. And yeah, as we can somehow in our minds try and imagine the work there amongst the refugees and the camps, even if they're more established now with houses and so on, we can definitely be praying for the guys. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any final thought as we wrap this up? Any final scripture, anything maybe that sustained you over the years? Any hints or tips for folks thinking, I don't know, if you're recruiting people to come and join you or encouraging more workers for Lebanon or that part of Lebanon, but even generally, anything you'd like to just throw out there to our listeners before we finish?
I think I would just want to say in my parting words, I mentioned a dark night of the soul for Nor, but I would say I went through my own post-revolution pandemic blast, and our team had left, and I felt very, very alone, and went through my own dark night of the soul where I just, even the presence of God, the felt presence of God felt so hidden. And I questioned my calling here. I questioned my faith. I questioned everything. And I think that I would want to say, for anyone who feels that every day is just full of darkness and confusion, that there is an end, that there is a restoration, and that all will be well.
Thank you. That's really encouraging. Is that something you've seen just in your personal life that took some time, but that has been restored to a degree? Is that part of your current story?
Yes, I would say it's definitely been restored. It was about 5 years of hard suffering, confusion, but in some ways I'm grateful for that season too, because again, going back to this shifting sand and rock, it really helped me to find my rock. People are going to come and go, countries will rise and fall, but the Lord is my rock and my salvation, and that does not change, no matter if it feels like he is or it doesn't feel like he is. That is the constant.
That's brilliant. And that's also such good advice for anyone thinking of going into ministry, whether at home or overseas. Because we have to find our solid ground in Christ, because there will be so many challenges in life, in ministry. And if we are battered, by just life itself, and we don't have that solid ground, the disappointments of other people will hit us too hard. So yeah, we've got to somehow just find that, make sure we're there with that rock. And even in the dark times, we know therefore that, yes, there is a place to come back to. And things will be well again, even if, into eternity, it's only going to be fulfilled then. Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed listening to your stories and your wisdom. God bless you as you continue in all the things you're doing and the counseling training and psychology that you're learning, the gospel opportunities in the camps and there in the city. God bless your kids and your husband. And yeah, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. It was a privilege to share. Thank you.
Great. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks so much for joining us today, guys. For more, check us out on our website, frontiers.org.uk, and on all social media platforms @FrontiersUK. Have a great week and make sure you don't miss our next episode.